The British newspaper reported that the new coronavirus was made in the United States. Now the people all over the world are waiting for the US government to respond. After all, the US has been studying and using bioweapons for more than a day or two. Today, we will expose the evil historical crimes of the United States. 1. The earliest bioweapons. Bioweapons are a combination of biological weapons and chemical weapons. The meaning of biological weapons is weapons used in biological warfare to kill living things and destroy plants. According to this statement, the history of the earliest use of bioweapons in the United States can be traced back to the end of the 15th century. At that time, the Western countries were in a sea of heat. And after Columbus discovered the new continent, the first group of Europeans, who are now the ancestors of the United States, set foot on the land of North America. These people deliberately gave the patients clothes with flowers to the Indians as a gift. And as expected, it caused a large number of local Aborigines to die. At the same time, the far-fetched missionary began to brainwash the surviving Indians. It is said that this is God's punishment for the Indians. They have to submit to the far-fetched master to survive. But the ancestors of the Americans did not say that they did it. After the Indians chose to surrender, they still implemented the genocide policy against the Indians. This led to only 250,000 Indians with a population of nearly 100 million. It is also the largest genocide in the world so far. And the main cause of this genocide is the Tianwa virus spread by the United States. So it is very likely that the habit of the Americans to use biochemical weapons is engraved in the genes. Even Hitler said that he was inspired to order his soldiers to put chemical weapons in World War II. It was after reading the American history of war. This is really a dog biting a dog. It is worth mentioning that in World War II, the United States, as one of the members of the Anti-Fascist Alliance, once fought against Japan. But after the war ended, he did not talk about the 731 troops. Do you know why? Logically speaking, Japan's 731 troops experimented with living people in our country and applied the research results many times on the battlefield. This inhumane practice should be sentenced to death in the International Military Court. But these devils actually escaped under the protection of the United States. Even after some of the researchers returned to Japan, they were still in the ranks of scientists. They published many papers based on the results of the living experiment. But the United States did not help Japan. Their goal is the results of the 731 troops' 14 years of virus research and the data of the living experiment. The initiator of this behavior is the five-star general of the United States, Mike Osler. He also appeared in the Korean War. Let's not go into too much detail here. In the end, the minister of the 731 troops, Shai Jingsalang, signed a joint agreement with the United States. It will contain more than 8,000 detailed human experiment records, 800 photos, and different bacterial data such as rats, disasters, and living things. The 35-page report was handed over to the United States. And the Americans rejected China's accusation of Japan's bacterial warfare in the Tokyo trial. They protected Shai Jingsalang and the more than 3,000 members of the 731 troops from prosecution. Not only that, the Americans also hired Shai Jingsalang as a senior consultant for Detroit. And the place where the Japanese researchers worked was openly named the 731 building to continue the bacterial experiment. Later, the highest official of Detroit, Baldwin, listened to Shai Jingsalang's incitement and conducted a living bacterial experiment locally in the United States. This project was very popular at the time. There was even a saying in the US government. That is, biochemical weapons should be more important than atomic bombs. Because for them, biochemical weapons are the best weapon to realize their imperialist tyranny. That's it. The optimistic 731 troops gradually realized Americanization under American manipulation. Then, the biochemical weapons used in the Vietnam War were harmful to the world. The US has always been reluctant on the Korean battlefield. But in fact, for them, it was not a gain at all. It's just that they couldn't tell the clinical effects of biochemical weapons on the battlefield directly. After all, it's the look of the world police. But after all, it's hard to change the nature of the country. The US could achieve its goal through North Korea, and it was given to Vietnam by them. So the US recklessly restarted the Vietnam War. But history is always surprisingly similar. In 1961, when the US was trapped in the Vietnam War, it used biochemical weapons again. And there are still millions of people in Vietnam who are tortured by US biochemical weapons. The chemical weapon used by the US this time is a toxin. It's a deadly poison that's mixed with a toxic substance, 2-hexane. When in contact with the human body, although the human body will not die instantly, it may cause cancer through indirect physiological processes. It can even bring many sequelae to the next generation. For example, severe symptoms such as brain paralysis, stroke, and congenital disability. According to statistics, the US's investment in Vietnam has lasted for several years. The total number is more than 7 million. These efforts have led to the complete destruction of 5.5 million acres of land and 10 million acres of farmland in Vietnam. But the most important thing is that since the 1960s, at least 3 or 4 generations of people have been tortured. That is to say, so far, there are more than 1 million people in Vietnam who are suffering from sequelae. And the incidence rate of the next generation of newborns will not decrease over time. In short, the history of the use of biochemical weapons in the United States is a grave sin. But they have never reflected on it. Instead, they have been pushing for research on biochemical weapons. Some time ago, Russia discovered 36 US-funded laboratories in the vicinity of Ukraine. They also found evidence in them that the US was studying the coronavirus. It's hard not to wonder what kind of connection there is between the US and the new crown. Speaking of which, I have to mention the US's Dutton-Rickshaw Biological Laboratory. Dutton-Rickshaw was urgently closed by the US at the beginning of its history with the new crown and the world. After that, the US began to pour dirty water on our country, asking the World Health Organization to investigate the source of the virus. But the funny thing is that when our country accepted the investigation, the US did not accept the results of the investigation and gave a lot of examples to prove that China was the source of the virus. At that time, many people in the world suspected that the US had been targeting China and asked the US to accept the US's investigation. But the US was resolutely opposed to this. Even the senior researcher at its Public Affairs Institute, Stephen Kinzer, directly shouted that Dutton-Rickshaw could not be investigated. Since then, in order not to accept the US's investigation, the US simply withdrew from the US. I have to say that I feel like I have no money. What's more strange is that the US media, which has always been in favor of so-called freedom of the press, has remained silent at this time. Their spirit of questioning, which they are best at when provoking other countries' affairs, has also disappeared. Now, the US's explosives have once again involved Dutton-Rickshaw. I'm afraid the US can't hide it. This company called Monard has a lot of famous researchers. One of them is Dr. Barrett, who is in charge of the restructuring of the coronavirus. He also has a partner in this